Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Daniel Ashworth, but everyone just calls me Dan. I've been a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years now. And in all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, rattlesnakes, rock slides, lost hikers, you name it. I grew up in Gatlinburg, so these hills are in my blood. My daddy used to take me camping up here when I was just a kid, teaching me to respect the wilderness and the people who came before us. But I never believed the old stories. Not until November of 1977, when I found what was left of that spelunking team from the University of Tennessee. It was a cold morning, with frost covering everything like a white blanket. The temperature had dropped to about 25 degrees overnight, and my breath came out in little puffs as I walked to the ranger station. I was supposed to have a quiet day, just some paperwork, and maybe checking a few trail markers. That's when the call came in. "Dan, we got a problem," said my supervisor Tom. His voice sounded worried. "Got 5 college kids who went into the Cataract Falls cave system 2 days ago. They were supposed to be back yesterday." I felt my stomach drop. The Cataract Falls caves weren't a place for amateurs. They stretched for miles underground, with twisting passages and underground rivers that could trap you if you didn't know what you were doing. And this time of year, with the cold setting in, hypothermia could kill you in hours. "What do we know about them?" I asked, already reaching for my cave rescue gear. "College students, all of them. The group leader is Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the geology department. She's got experience, but her team." Tom shook his head. "One of them is Professor Collins' daughter, 19 years old, first time in a real cave system. That made it worse. When a professor's kid goes missing, the whole university starts breathing down your neck. The media shows up. Everyone wants answers fast. But caves don't care about your deadline, they'll kill you just as quick. Whether you're rushing or taking your time." I loaded my truck with all the gear we'd need. 300 feet of static rope, carbide helmet lamps, emergency oxygen, first aid supplies. My partner Mike Stevens was already waiting at the cave entrance when I got there, along with 4 other rangers. Mike had been doing cave rescues almost as long as me, and I trusted him with my life. The entrance to the Cataract Falls cave system sits about 9 miles from the nearest maintained trail, hidden behind thick rhododendron bushes that most hikers never bother to push through. You have to know it's there to find it. The Cherokee used to consider this whole area sacred burial caves, they said. My grandmother, who was part Cherokee herself, used to tell me stories about spirits that lived in these caves. Nevi Anisgaya, she called them. Cave spirits that could steal your breath away. As a kid, those stories gave me nightmares. As an adult, I figured they were just meant to keep people away from dangerous places. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to my grandmother. When we reached the cave entrance, the first thing I noticed was wrong was the equipment. Their gear was scattered around the opening, like they'd dropped everything and run. But that didn't make sense. Experienced cavers don't abandon their gear unless something's really wrong. And their carbide lamps were still burning. After 48 hours, they should have run out of fuel. "That's weird," Mike said, kneeling down to examine one of the lamps. "These things only hold about 12 hours worth of carbide. How are they still going?" I picked up their registration sheet from the Park Service box near the entrance. They'd planned a 12-hour exploration, just mapping some of the upper chambers, basic stuff. But something about the scene didn't feel right. The November air was bitter cold, but when I stuck my hand near the cave entrance, warm air was flowing out. That wasn't normal either. "Temperature in there feels like it's about 65 degrees, I told Mike. "Should be maybe 40, same as outside." "Geothermal activity?" he suggested. "Maybe." I tried to think of a good reason why bats weren't flying in and out of the cave like they usually did this time of year. The whole area felt too quiet, too still. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. We set up our surface command post and checked our radios. Everything worked fine outside the cave. I called down to headquarters to let them know we were going in. Then Mike and I started into the darkness, our headlamps cutting through the black like weak yellow fingers. The cave felt wrong from the moment we stepped inside. The first 200 feet into the cave were normal enough. Limestone walls, smooth floor worn down by thousands of years of water flow, the usual musty smell of damp rock and bat droppings. Our boots echoed in the darkness as we made our way deeper, following the main passage toward the chamber system where the college team had planned to work. But then our radios started acting up. "Base camp, this is Dan, radio check." I spoke into my handset. Nothing but static answered back. "That's weird," Mike said. "We're not that deep yet." I tried again, but the radio was completely dead. In 17 years of cave rescues, I'd never lost contact that close to the entrance. Mike's radio was doing the same thing, nothing but white noise and the occasional pop of static. "Must be some kind of mineral deposits messing with the signal," I told him, but I didn't really believe it. My compass was spinning too, the needle turning in slow circles like it couldn't find north. We kept going. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and that's where we found the first real sign of trouble. Sarah's helmet was sitting on a rock ledge, cracked right down the middle. But there was no blood, no hair stuck to it, nothing to show how it had gotten broken. Mike picked it up and turned it over in his hands. "This crack, it's too clean. Like something crushed it in one spot, really hard." I played my light around the chamber walls and found something that made my skin crawl. Scratch marks in the limestone, running in parallel lines about 4 inches apart. They were too regular to be natural, too deep to be made by any animal I knew about. "Bear claws?" Mike asked, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Bears don't scratch limestone," I said. "And they don't come this far into caves anyway." We followed the main passage deeper into the mountain. The temperature kept getting warmer instead of colder, and our battery-powered equipment was draining faster than it should. My flashlight, which had been fully charged that morning, was already getting dim. That's when we heard the voices. At first, it sounded like normal conversation echoing from somewhere ahead of us. We stopped and listened, and I felt a rush of relief. They were alive, and they were talking. We'd found them. "Hello," I called out. "This is Ranger Ashworth with the Park Service. Can you hear me?" The voices stopped for a moment, then started again. But this time, they seemed to be coming from a different direction. Behind us instead of ahead. "Sarah? Dr. Mitchell?" Mike called. The voices answered, but not in English. It sounded like Cherokee, but not quite right. The words were all twisted, like someone was trying to speak a language they didn't really know. We followed the voices deeper into the cave system, through passages that got narrower and then opened up again into chambers I'd never mapped before. The sound seemed to stay just ahead of us, always around the next corner, always just out of reach. After about an hour of this, we found their campsite. It was set up in a big chamber about the size of a high school gymnasium, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our headlamps. But the camp looked wrong. Their sleeping bags were arranged in a perfect circle, like they'd been doing some kind of ceremony. Their gear was sorted into neat piles that no college student would ever make. And in the center of the circle, someone had built a pile of rocks. "That's a Cherokee burial cairn," I said, recognizing the pattern from my grandmother's stories. Mike walked over to examine it closer. How would college kids know how to build one of these? I was about to answer when I heard something that made my blood freeze. One of the voices, clear as day, calling my name. "Don Ashworth." It was coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber, a narrow opening that led deeper into the mountain. The voice sounded like Sarah Mitchell, the geology professor, but there was something off about it. It was too flat, too empty. "Dr. Mitchell?" I called back. "Are you hurt? We're here to help you." The voice called my name again, but this time it was coming from a different passage entirely. Then another voice joined it, and another, until I could hear all 5 of them calling to me from different directions. That's when Mike grabbed my arm. "Dan," he whispered. "Look." I followed his gaze and saw her, Sarah Collins, the 19-year-old student, standing in the passage about 50 feet away. She was just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her skin looked pale as moonlight in our headlamp beams. "Sarah," I called out, "are you okay? Where are the others?" She turned to look at us, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the whole eye, like looking into 2 holes in her head. "We're waiting for you," she said in a voice that didn't sound human anymore. We've been waiting so long. Then she stepped backward into the wall and disappeared, like she was made of smoke. Mike's hands started shaking so bad he dropped his flashlight. The crash echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, and suddenly all the voices stopped calling. The silence that followed was worse than the voices had been. We should have turned around right then, I know that now. But we were rangers, and there were people down there who needed our help. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as we went deeper into the cave system, following the passage where Sarah had disappeared. The walls were different in this section. Instead of smooth limestone, they were covered in strange mineral deposits that looked almost like writing, spirals and lines that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. And the temperature kept climbing. It had to be close to 70 degrees now, warm enough that we were starting to sweat in our heavy jackets. "This doesn't make any sense," Mike muttered, wiping his forehead. "There's no geothermal activity in this area. The whole mountain should be cold as ice." My radio crackled suddenly, making both of us jump. Through the static, I could hear a voice, faint but definitely human. "Anyone there?" "Trapped." "Something's wrong with the others." "Hello?" I spoke into the radio. "This is Ranger Ashworth." "Who is this? What's your location? Help us." They're not themselves anymore. The signal was breaking up, but it sounded like one of the college students. Male voice, probably the graduate student who'd been leading the expedition with Dr. Mitchell. "Can you describe your surroundings?" I asked. "Any landmarks, chamber features?" "The burial chamber. We found the burial chamber. We shouldn't have touched anything. Oh God, they're coming back." The radio went dead. Mike was staring at me with wide eyes. "Burial chamber?" "The Cherokee sites are supposed to be deeper in the system, places no white person has ever been." "Maybe they went off course," I said, but I was thinking about my grandmother's stories again. About places in these mountains where the dead didn't rest easy. We followed the passage for another quarter-mile before it opened up into the biggest underground chamber I'd ever seen. It stretched out beyond the reach of our headlamps, with formations that looked like frozen waterfalls hanging from the ceiling. But it wasn't the size that made my skin crawl, it was what was in it. Bones. Hundreds of them, arranged in careful patterns across the chamber floor. Not scattered like you'd expect from animal remains, but placed deliberately, like someone had been using them to write messages in a language I couldn't read. And they weren't old bones. Some of them still had bits of flesh clinging to them. "Jesus," Mike whispered, "what happened here?" I was about to answer when I heard footsteps echoing from somewhere in the darkness ahead of us. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to be getting closer. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Then, from about 20 feet away, I heard Dr. Sarah Mitchell's voice, clear as day. "We found something wonderful down here, Ranger Ashworth, something the Cherokee left for us to find." I played my headlamp in the direction of her voice and saw her standing next to one of the bone arrangements. But like Sarah Collins before her, something was wrong with her appearance. Her skin was too pale, almost gray, and when she smiled, her teeth looked sharp. "Dr. Mitchell, thank God you're alive. Where are the others? Are they hurt?" "They're here," she said, and gestured with one hand. That's when I saw them. All 5 members of the expedition, standing in a line behind her. They were all smiling the same sharp-toothed smile, all standing perfectly still with their arms at their sides like soldiers at attention. "We've been learning so much, Doctor," Mitchell continued. "The Cherokee knew secrets that modern science is just beginning to understand. About the boundaries between life and death. About what lies beneath the earth." "Ma'am, you've been missing for 2 days," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your families are worried about you. We need to get you out of here and to a hospital." "But we can't leave," said Sarah Collins, stepping forward from the line. Her black eyes reflected our headlamp beams like a cat's. "We belong here now, just like you will." That's when I noticed that Mike hadn't said anything in several minutes. I turned to look at him and felt ice run through my veins. His eyes were starting to turn black around the edges, and when he looked at me, his expression was completely empty. "Mike," I said quietly, "we need to go. Right now." "They're right, Dan," he said in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. "We do belong here. Can't you feel it? This place is calling to us. It's been calling for so long." The 5 college students started walking toward us, moving in perfect sync like they were all controlled by the same mind. Their feet made no sound on the cave floor, and I realized they were floating just slightly above the ground. I grabbed Mike's arm and tried to pull him toward the passage we'd come from, but he resisted. His skin felt cold as ice through his jacket, and when I looked into his eyes, there was nothing there. Nothing human, anyway. The Cherokee tried to warn people. "Doctor," Mitchell said, her voice now coming from all around us instead of just from her mouth. "They tried to keep the sacred places safe. But white men never listen to warnings, do they?" The chamber started to change around us. The walls began breathing, expanding and contracting like we were inside some giant lung. The underground stream that ran through one side of the room suddenly reversed direction, flowing upward toward the ceiling in defiance of gravity. And from deeper in the cave system, I could hear chanting. Not Cherokee, chanting something older, something that had been going on for a very long time. "You disturbed our rest," said a new voice. And I turned to see 6 figures emerging from the cave walls themselves. They looked like Cherokee warriors, but they were translucent, like they were made of fog. Their eye sockets were empty holes. And when they moved, they left trails of cold air behind them. "You took what was not yours to take," the lead spirit continued. "Now you must stay with us, forever." Mike laughed, but it wasn't his laugh anymore. It was the sound of wind blowing through empty spaces. "Forever," he repeated, and started walking toward the spirits. I ran. I stumbled through the dark passages, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly as I tried to find my way back to the surface. Behind me, I could hear them following the hollow sound of footsteps that didn't quite touch the ground, and Mike's voice calling my name in that empty, dead tone. "Dan, don't run from us, Dan, we're your friends." But I kept running, even as the cave walls seemed to shift and change around me. Passages that I remembered going straight now curved in impossible directions. The ceiling got lower and higher without warning, forcing me to duck or climb over formations that hadn't been there before. The spirits were playing with the cave itself, changing it like it was made of clay instead of solid rock. I turned a corner and found myself in a chamber I'd never seen before, even though I was sure I'd been running back the way we came. The walls were covered in Cherokee symbols carved deep into the limestone, and in the center of the room was a natural pool of water that glowed with its own pale light. "You cannot leave," came a voice from behind me. I turned and saw the lead spirit standing in the chamber entrance. Up close, I could see that he had once been a man, a Cherokee warrior with traditional clothing and war paint that looked like it had been applied yesterday. But his face was ancient, worn down by decades of pain and anger. "You know our story," he continued. "You are Cherokee blood yourself. You know what was done to us." And I did know. My grandmother had told me about the Trail of Tears, about how the Cherokee had been forced from their ancestral lands at gunpoint, about the thousands who had died on the forced march to Oklahoma, about the warriors who had tried to fight back and been killed defending their people's sacred places. "You died protecting this place," I said. "We died," the spirit agreed. "But we could not rest. Not while our burial grounds remained unguarded, not while white men continued to steal from the dead. Those college students, they didn't know, they were just exploring. They took our grave goods," another spirit said, materializing from the cave wall. "They disturbed our rest for their curiosity. That cannot be forgiven." I thought about what I'd seen in that bone-filled chamber, about Dr. Mitchell and her team, transformed into something that wasn't quite alive and wasn't quite dead. "You're keeping them here, making them like you." "We are lonely," the first spirit said simply. "We have been alone with our anger for so long. They will help us guard this place, and you will join them." The spirit reached out toward me, and I saw that his hand was just bones held together by wisps of gray mist. When his fingers touched my arm, cold shot through my whole body like I'd been struck by lightning. I could feel my life draining away, flowing into him like water through a broken dam. But more than that, I could feel his memories, the pain of watching his family forced from their homes, the rage of seeing sacred burial caves looted by treasure hunters, the agony of dying alone in these tunnels, protecting graves that white men would just keep violating no matter how many people he killed. For a moment, I understood why they were doing this. I felt their pain, their desperate need to protect what little they had left of their people's legacy. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry for what was done to you." The spirit paused, his grip on my arm loosening slightly. "You understand." "I do. But killing people won't bring your families back. It won't undo what happened on the Trail of Tears. It will protect our dead. There are other ways to protect them, I said, remembering something my grandmother had taught me years ago. Thomas Crowfeather, he's an elder who lives down in Gatlinburg. He knows the old ceremonies. He could help make this right. The spirit's empty eye sockets seemed to focus on me more intently. You would do this? You would ensure that our dead are honored properly? I thought about Dr. Mitchell and her students, transformed into hollow guardians in the darkness. I thought about Mike, his humanity drained away to feed these angry spirits. And I made a choice that would change the rest of my life. Yes, I'll make sure this place is protected the right way. Through the Park Service, we'll work with the Cherokee Nation to establish these caves as an official sacred site. No more college expeditions, no more grave robbing. The spirit stared at me for a long moment, then slowly removed his hand from my arm. The cold receded, and I could feel my life force flowing back into my body. You give your word? Your oath as a Cherokee descendant? I give my word. The spirit nodded, then spoke in Cherokee words I didn't understand but somehow felt in my bones. The other spirits gathered around us, and together they began to chant. The cave walls stopped breathing. The upward flowing stream reversed itself again, running normally toward the lower levels, and slowly, very slowly, the supernatural cold began to lift. Your friends will be returned to you, the lead spirit said. But they will remember nothing of this place. That is our gift to them, and our protection for ourselves. And you? What will you do? We will rest, finally, but we will still be watching. If our sacred places are violated again. He didn't need to finish the threat. They won't be, I promised. The spirit smiled, then the first human expression I'd seen from him. You remind us of your grandmother. She used to bring offerings to our burial sites when she was a child. Tobacco and cornmeal, as is proper. My grandmother had never told me about that. The spirits began to fade, becoming translucent again, then just wisps of mist, then nothing at all. The chamber grew quiet, except for the sound of running water. From somewhere behind me, I heard Mike calling my name, but this time, it was really Mike. We found Dr. Mitchell and her students unconscious in the big chamber, lying in their sleeping bags like they'd just been taking a nap. They woke up confused and hypothermic, with no memory of the past 48 hours. When we asked them about the bone chamber or the burial sites, they just stared at us blankly. We were mapping the upper chambers, Doctor, Mitchell said as we helped her walk toward the cave entrance. I remember setting up camp, and then, nothing. Did we hit our heads on something? Mike didn't remember anything either. According to him, we'd gone into the cave, found the team sleeping in the chamber, and woken them up. When I tried to remind him about the spirits or the bone arrangements, he looked at me like I was talking crazy. Carbon dioxide poisoning, the Park Service doctors said later. Common in poorly ventilated cave systems, causes hallucinations, memory loss, hypothermia. Lucky thing, you found them when you did. That became the official story. The Cataract Falls cave system was declared off-limits due to geological instability and dangerous air quality. Signs were posted, barriers were put up, and the area was quietly removed from all Park Service maps. But I kept my promise to the spirits. 2 weeks after the incident, I drove down to Gatlinburg and found Thomas Crowfeather. He was an old man, maybe in his 70s, who ran a small shop selling traditional Cherokee crafts. When I told him what had happened, the real story, not the carbon dioxide version, he just nodded like he'd been expecting it. The envy high on his Gaia, he said. My grandfather told me they were still there, still protecting the burial caves. Most people thought the stories were just legends. They want proper ceremonies, I told him. They want their dead to be honored the right way. Thomas agreed to help. Every month now, he comes up to the cave entrance and performs the traditional rituals. Tobacco offerings, cornmeal, prayers in Cherokee. He's taught me some of the ceremonies too, so I can maintain them when he's not able to make the trip. The strange incidents stopped completely after that. No more missing hikers in that area, no more reports of voices in the caves. The spirits were finally at rest. But I transferred to the Cultural Preservation Department anyway. I couldn't go back to regular ranger work after what I'd experienced. Now I spend my days working with Native American tribes to protect sacred sites throughout the national park system. It's become my life's work, making sure that what happened to Dr. Mitchell's team never happens again. I still hear the Cherokee chanting sometimes, during thunderstorms, or on quiet nights when the wind blows just right through the mountains. But it doesn't frighten me anymore. It sounds peaceful now, like a lullaby or a prayer. The spirits are still there, still watching, still protecting their sacred places. But they're not angry anymore. And sometimes, when I'm performing the monthly ceremonies at the cave entrance, I see a translucent figure standing just inside the darkness, the lead warrior, nodding his approval. The Cherokee knew these mountains long before any white person set foot in them. They knew which places were sacred, which caves held the bones of their ancestors, which streams carried the voices of the dead. We should have listened to their warnings from the beginning. Most people don't believe in ghosts or spirits. They think the old stories are just superstition, fairy tales meant to frighten children. I used to think that too. But last month, 3 college students from Vanderbilt ignored the barriers at Cataract Falls. They cut through the fence and went into the cave system anyway, looking for adventure. Their equipment was found at the entrance the next morning, still running, their carbide lamps burning with fuel that should have run out hours earlier. The search team I sent in reported hearing voices calling from deep in the caves, voices speaking in Cherokee, asking for the spirits to be left in peace. We never found those 3 students. Officially, it was another case of carbon dioxide poisoning. They probably got disoriented and fell into one of the underground rivers. Their bodies were never recovered, but I know better. I know that some guardians never leave their posts. And I know that the Nva Yaniskaya are still there, still protecting their sacred places, still waiting for the next person who thinks they can take what doesn't belong to them. The Cherokee tried to warn us. They tried to tell us which places should be left alone. Maybe it's time we finally started listening. My name is Rebecca Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, working the wild mountains of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. I've tracked black bears through thick woods, relocated angry mountain lions, and dealt with every kind of dangerous animal you can think of. But I never believed the old miners' stories about the beast of Raven's Peak until I found a 400-pound black bear hanging from a tree branch like a Christmas ornament. October 1985 was when it all started. The leaves were turning brilliant orange and red, and there was already talk of early snow coming. I was stationed at the Ravens Peak area, about 18 miles from the nearest road. It's rough country up there, steep mountains, thick forests, and old abandoned coal mines from the 1922. Most folks avoid the place, especially the locals. They've got stories going back 60 years about something living in those old mine shafts. I'm 35 years old, single, and I have a PhD in wildlife biology from Virginia Tech. I know animals. I understand how they think, how they hunt, how they mark their territory. After 13 years in these mountains, I thought I'd seen everything nature could throw at me. The miners, who worked Ravens Peak back in the day, they had stories about a coal demon that lived deep underground. Welsh families mostly, carrying old traditions from the homeland about spirits called knockers that lived in mine tunnels. When the big cave-in happened in 1923 and killed 47 men, the supernatural stories really took off. Families claimed something evil had been released from deep in the earth. I always figured it was just mountain folklore. People needed explanations for tragedies, and ghost stories helped them cope with dangerous work and deadly accidents. Every mining town has its legends, but the livestock killings that started that October were different. Not just different, impossible. Farmers in the valley below Ravens Peak began losing cattle and sheep. The kills were brutal, but clean. No feeding, no scavenging marks, just dead animals positioned in strange ways. Sometimes arranged in circles around trees. Sometimes hung from branches that should have snapped under the weight. I investigated every kill site with my usual equipment: plaster for casting tracks, measuring tape, UV lights for blood pattern analysis. My field kit included a Dan-inject tranquilizer rifle with telazol darts strong enough for large mammals. Standard procedure for unknown predators. Document everything, identify the animal, and relocate it safely. Except none of the evidence made sense. The claw marks were wrong, 6 inches between the tips, which was impossible for any North American predator. The spacing suggested something massive, but the depth showed they could cut through steel cables like they were made of paper. I found one farmer's steel fence post shredded like aluminum foil. The tracks were even stranger. When I could find them, which wasn't often, they showed a bipedal creature with extended claws on what looked like toes. But the stride length was 12 feet, and the impressions went 18 inches deep in soft ground. Whatever made them weighed more than a grizzly bear, but moved faster than a deer. The local families whispered among themselves, but wouldn't talk to me directly. I'd catch fragments of conversation at the general store in town. Thing in the deep shaft, and Briggs family knows, and sealed for a reason. But when I turned around, people found urgent business elsewhere. The forest itself felt wrong. I'd worked these mountains for over a decade, and they'd never felt like this. The songbirds were gone, not migrated, just gone. The area around Raven's Peak had become a 2-mile circle of silence. Even the bears had vanished, which was impossible during peak foraging season before winter. Trees showed stress patterns I'd never seen, leaves yellowing and dropping in perfect health, as if something in the soil was poisoning root systems. And there was a smell around the old mine entrances, metallic and sharp, like copper pennies mixed with sulfur. My radio equipment worked fine until I got within a quarter-mile of the mining area. Then static, filled with what sounded like metal scraping against stone. GPS units showed elevation readings that were off by hundreds of feet. Trail cameras malfunctioned, producing images of pure black shapes that looked like holes cut in reality. I should have requested backup then, should have called the state wildlife office for additional personnel, but I was proud of my reputation as the ranger who could handle anything these mountains threw at her. I'd successfully tracked and relocated 47 problem bears without incident. I wasn't about to let mountain superstitions and equipment failures defeat me. That pride almost got me killed. The first body changed everything. Jake Morrison was an experienced hunter, 62 years old, who'd been tracking deer in these woods since he was a boy. His wife called when he didn't come home from his regular Thursday hunt. I found his truck at the old logging road, hunting rifle still in the rack, thermos of coffee still warm. The blood trail led uphill through dense rhododendron thickets toward the abandoned mining area. Not drops or spatters, but gouges dragged through fallen leaves and soft earth, as if something had grabbed Jake and pulled him while he fought. I followed standard tracking protocol, marking my path with bright orange flagging tape, photographing every disturbed area, measuring the drag marks. They were consistent with a large predator attack, except for the spacing. Whatever grabbed Jake had claws positioned like fingers, not paws. I found him 300 yards from his truck, and it took everything I had not to vomit. Jake had been torn apart, but not randomly. The wounds were precise, surgical almost. His rifle lay 20 feet away, the steel barrel twisted into a pretzel shape. The scope was crushed, like someone had squeezed it in their fist. But it was Jake's hunting knife that really shook me. High-carbon steel, razor-sharp, built to field dress a deer. It was snapped in half, and both pieces had been driven 6 inches into the trunk of an oak tree. The force required to do that would bend a sledgehammer. I documented everything, took photographs from multiple angles, collected samples of the unusual claw marks in nearby trees. The cuts went through bark and into hardwood as easily as scissors through paper. Some were 12 feet above ground level, suggesting whatever made them could either jump impossibly high or climb vertical surfaces. That night in my ranger station, I called Dr. Martin Hayes from the State Wildlife Biology Office. Martin was my mentor, a careful scientist who'd spent 30 years studying predator behavior across 3 states. If anyone could identify what we were dealing with, it was him. "Becca, you're describing something that doesn't exist?" Martin said after I read him my field notes. "North American predators don't have that kind of strength or claw structure. Are you sure about these measurements?" I double-checked everything, triple-checked. The evidence was solid. "Could be an escaped exotic," Martin suggested. "Rich people collect big cats, sometimes bears. Maybe something got loose from a private menagerie." It was the most logical explanation, but it didn't feel right. Exotic predators still followed biological rules. They didn't twist steel rifle barrels or drive knife blades through living trees. Martin agreed to drive up from Charleston the next morning with additional testing equipment. Meanwhile, I was to secure the kill site and watch for additional animal activity. I set up observation post on a ridge overlooking the area where Jake died. Military surplus night vision, motion-activated cameras, seismic sensors to detect large animal movement. If something was still hunting in those woods, I'd document it properly. The first strange thing happened at sunset. The forest went completely silent. Not gradually, like animals settling for the night, but instantly. One moment I could hear normal October sounds, wind through leaves, distant woodpecker, squirrel chatter. The next moment, nothing. Even the wind stopped. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 10 minutes. My breath started showing in the air, and frost began forming on my equipment. In October, at 7 p.m., with no weather system moving through the area, at 9:04 p.m., my motion sensors triggered. Something large was moving through the trees below, but I couldn't see it through the night vision scope. The infrared showed a cold spot, actually colder than the surrounding air, moving in a straight line toward Jake's body. The movement was wrong. It flowed between trees without deviation, never hesitating or investigating scents like a normal predator would. And it was fast, covering ground at a pace that would require a sustained 30-mile-per-hour run through dense forest. I watched the cold spot reach Jake's location and stop. For 20 minutes, it remained stationary. Then it began moving again, but not away from the area. It started circling, creating a perfect spiral pattern that expanded outward from the kill site, like it was looking for something. Or someone. The cold spot paused at the base of my ridge. Through the scope, I watched tree branches bend and sway, as if something massive was pushing through them, but the infrared showed only empty space. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A sound like metal dragging across stone, but rhythmic, deliberate, getting closer. I abandoned my observation post and hiked back to my truck in the dark, using GPS and flashlight to navigate the rough trail. Every shadow looked wrong, every normal forest sound seemed threatening. But I made it back to the ranger station without incident. The next morning, I returned to collect my equipment. The motion sensors were destroyed, not damaged, but flattened, as if they'd been stepped on by something weighing several tons. The night vision scope was missing entirely. And around the base of my observation ridge, I found tracks. Not the partial prints I'd discovered before, but perfect impressions in soft mud near a small creek. 18 inches long, showing 5 distinct toes with retractable claws. The stride length was 14 feet, and the depth indicated a weight over 800 pounds. But the most disturbing detail was the pattern. The tracks didn't wander or follow scent trails like a normal animal. They moved in straight lines between specific points. Jake's body, my observation post, the trail back to the parking area, like something intelligent had been systematically investigating the area. Like it knew exactly what it was looking for. Dr. Martin Hayes arrived that afternoon with equipment I'd never seen before. Electromagnetic field detectors, infrared thermal cameras, even a seismograph for measuring underground vibrations. His official report would focus on identifying an escaped exotic predator, but I could see the worry in his eyes as he examined my evidence. "These track casts don't match anything in the database," Martin said, studying the plaster molds under a magnifying lens. "The bone structure is wrong for bears, the claw configuration doesn't match any big cat species, and these stress marks in the tree bark suggest cutting force beyond any known animal." Tommy Briggs showed up while we were setting up new monitoring equipment. He was about 25, grandson of one of the miners killed in the 1923 cave-in. Local families mostly avoided talking to park rangers, but Tommy seemed different, nervous, like he had something important to say. "My grandfather left journals," Tommy said, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "From before the accident, he wrote about hearing things in the deep shafts. Voices in languages that weren't human." Martin looked skeptical, but I encouraged Tommy to continue. "The miners found a natural cave system below the coal seams. Bigger than anything they'd expected, with passages leading down farther than their lights could reach. The company wanted them to seal it up and keep digging coal, but strange things started happening." "What kind of strange things?" I asked. "Tools would disappear and turn up twisted into shapes that made no sense. Miners working alone would be found unconscious with claw marks on their equipment. And there were sounds, metal scraping metal, but from empty tunnels." Tommy pulled out a worn leather journal, pages brown with age. "My grandfather wrote that something was imprisoned down there, something that had been waiting a long time to get out." The entries Martin read aloud gave me chills. Descriptions of supernatural strength, shadows that moved independently of light sources, and a presence that could project fear so intense it caused grown men to collapse. According to the journal, the mining company ordered the crews to dig deeper, despite the warnings, desperate to reach a rich coal seam below the cave system. The cave-in wasn't an accident, Tommy said quietly. My grandfather wrote that they broke through to something they shouldn't have. The thing got out, killed most of the crew, and the survivors had to collapse the mine to trap it again. Martin dismissed this as mining folklore, but I was starting to see patterns. The kill sites, the impossible strength, the systematic hunting behavior, it all fit with something intelligent and predatory that had been trapped underground for decades. That night, we set up a comprehensive monitoring network around the mining area. Motion detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders, even electromagnetic sensors to detect unusual electrical activity. If something was active in those woods, we'd have complete documentation. At 11:23 p.m., every piece of electronic equipment failed simultaneously. Not gradual malfunction, but instant shutdown as if someone had cut the power. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no wind, no sounds of any kind. Even my battery-powered watch stopped ticking. That's when we saw it. A shadow detached itself from the tree line and began moving toward our position, not walking or running, but flowing across the ground like liquid darkness. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall when it stood upright, but it moved with impossible grace and speed. Martin fumbled for his camera, but I grabbed his arm. Something primitive in my brain was screaming that drawing attention would be fatal. We crouched behind our equipment table and watched through the gap between two large boxes. The creature reached our monitoring station and began examining the failed electronics. Its hands were human-like but larger, with fingers that ended in metallic claws. When it picked up one of the thermal cameras, the metal housing crumpled like paper. Then it turned toward our hiding spot. The eyes were the worst part, glowing red, but not reflecting light like animal eyes do in darkness. These were generating their own illumination, and there was intelligence behind them. Ancient, patient, and completely inhuman. It knew we were there. The creature spoke in a voice like grinding metal. You should not have come here. The words were clear, despite the distorted delivery, and I realized it was speaking English, not animal sounds or random noise, but deliberate communication from something that understood language and chose to use it. Martin made a small sound of panic, and the creature's attention shifted to him. It took one step forward, covering 10 feet of ground effortlessly, and I heard Martin's breathing become rapid and shallow. The fear radiating from that thing was palpable, like a physical force pressing down on us. 13 years you have worked these mountains, the creature said, its glowing eyes fixed on me. You know the rules of hunter and prey. Tonight you learn which you truly are. It turned and walked back into the forest, movements fluid and silent. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, leaving only the metallic smell and our destroyed equipment. We packed everything we could carry and hiked out immediately, using flashlights and GPS to navigate the trail in darkness. Neither of us spoke until we reached my truck, and even then, our conversation was whispered. That thing knew you, Martin said as we drove back to town. It's been watching you. I couldn't argue. The way it spoke, the specific mention of 13 years. It had been studying me, just as I'd been studying it, and now it considered me a threat worth eliminating. The next morning, a family of 4 camping near Ravens Peak went missing. The Hendersons from Pittsburgh, experienced outdoors people with proper equipment and emergency procedures. Park rangers found their RV torn open like a can opener had peeled back the metal walls. Blood evidence suggested they'd been dragged away alive. The Pennsylvania State Police wanted to treat it as a potential murder investigation, but the evidence didn't support human involvement. The RV's steel frame had been twisted and bent by something with incredible strength. Claw marks in the metal showed the same 6-inch spacing we'd documented at previous sites. I led the search and rescue operation, but I knew we wouldn't find the Hendersons alive. The creature was escalating its hunting behavior, moving from individual kills to targeting groups. And based on its conversation with us, it was doing so deliberately. We were no longer investigating an unknown predator. We were being hunted by something intelligent, powerful, and absolutely ruthless. Something that had waited 60 years for the chance to hunt again and wasn't going to let park rangers or state police stop it. The beast of Ravens Peak was awake, and it was hungry. The search for the Henderson family led us directly into the creature's lair. Their trail of blood and torn clothing pointed toward the main mine entrance, a gaping hole in the mountainside that had been sealed with concrete and steel bars in 1924. The barriers had been torn apart from the inside. Tommy Briggs met us at the mine opening with equipment I didn't recognize: mining lamps that seemed unusually bright, coils of rope, and wooden stakes carved with strange symbols. When I asked about the stakes, he said they were Welsh protective charms his family had preserved since the 1922. My great-uncle was one of the survivors, Tommy explained. He taught our family the rituals that trapped the thing the first time. If we're going in there, we'll need them. Martin refused to believe we were dealing with anything supernatural. Even after our encounter the previous night, he insisted on treating this as a wildlife management situation. Unknown species, possibly mutated by chemical contamination in the mine. We document it, tranquilize it, and study it properly. I knew better, but Martin outranked me. His decision was final. We were going into those mine tunnels to locate the missing family and contain whatever predator was responsible for the deaths. The tunnels were worse than I'd expected. The air was thick with metallic smell and an underlying stench of decay. Our mining lamps illuminated rough stone walls carved by hand tools, wooden support beams rotting after 60 years, and passages that branched in multiple directions like a maze. 20 feet inside the entrance, we found Henderson family belongings scattered across the tunnel floor. Torn backpacks, camping equipment, children's toys, but no bodies and no additional blood. Whatever had taken them was keeping them alive somewhere deeper in the mine system. The temperature dropped as we went deeper. Our breath showed in the lamplight, and frost formed on the tunnel walls despite the season. Sound behaved strangely. Our voices echoed for too long, and sometimes we heard our own words repeated back in slightly different tones. 50 feet down the main passage, we found the first protective symbol: a Celtic cross carved deep into a wooden support beam, with Welsh words scratched below it in faded letters. Tommy translated, "Here sleeps the thing that should not wake." "There are more," Tommy said, pointing his lamp down the tunnel. My great-uncle said they placed them every 100 feet to contain the creature in the deepest chambers. We followed the protective symbols deeper into the mine, documenting everything. The passages showed signs of supernatural strength. Steel rails twisted into impossible shapes, rock walls gouged by claws, support timbers snapped like twigs despite being thick enough to support a building. The sound started when we reached the third protective symbol. Metal dragging across stone, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead of us. And underneath that, human voices. Weak and frightened, but definitely alive. "The Hendersons," Martin whispered. "They're still alive." We moved toward the voices, following a passage that sloped steadily downward. The protective symbols appeared more frequently here, suggesting we were approaching the area where the creature had originally been imprisoned. Some of the symbols had been defaced, not worn away by time, but deliberately scratched out by something with claws. The tunnel opened into a natural cave chamber, easily 100 feet across. Our lamplight couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but I could see movement in the shadows. And there, huddled against one wall, were the Henderson family. All 4 of them alive, but injured. The parents were trying to comfort their children while scanning the darkness fearfully. When our lights reached them, the father called out, "Help us, please, it's keeping us here for when it gets hungry." That's when the creature stepped into our light. 12 feet tall, covered in coarse black fur, with hands that ended in metallic claws and eyes that glowed like hot coals. It moved with fluid grace despite its massive size, and when it spoke, its voice filled the entire chamber. "You brought more food," it said, looking directly at me. How thoughtful. Martin raised his tranquilizer rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything that large should have been able to. One clawed hand knocked the weapon aside while the other grabbed Martin around the waist. I heard his ribs crack as it lifted him off the ground. "Your weapons cannot harm me," the creature said. "I am older than your civilization, stronger than your machines, hungrier than your worst nightmares." It threw Martin against the cave wall with casual violence. He hit the stone hard and didn't get up. Tommy was already setting up his wooden stakes in a defensive circle, chanting in Welsh under his breath. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. "You remember the old ways," it said to Tommy. Your blood carries the memory of those who imprisoned me. But I am stronger now, fed by decades of fear and fresh meat. Your ancestors' magic cannot hold me." The creature began stalking toward us, claws scraping across the stone floor. But as it approached Tommy's protective circle, its movement slowed. The carved symbols on the stakes were glowing with soft blue light, and the air around them shimmered like heat waves. "The bindings still have some power," the creature admitted, "but not enough, not anymore." It reached out with one clawed hand toward the nearest stake. The moment its claw touched the wood, blue sparks flew, and the creature jerked back with a roar of pain. But the stake also cracked and began to smoke. "Each touch weakens them," the creature said, "and I have all the time in the world." That's when I understood what we were really facing. This wasn't just a predator that had been accidentally released by mining. It was an ancient evil that had been deliberately imprisoned by people who understood its true nature. And those people had passed down the knowledge needed to stop it. "Tommy," I said quietly, "what did your great-uncle tell you about the binding ritual?" "Someone has to stay," Tommy whispered back. "Someone has to remain as warden, to maintain the seals and make sure it never gets out again." The creature heard us and laughed again. "Yes, tell her about the price. Tell her what happened to the last warden, alone in these tunnels for 40 years until madness took him." I looked at the Henderson family, terrified and injured but still alive. I thought about Jake Morrison, torn apart for the simple crime of hunting in the wrong woods. I thought about all the future victims, if this thing ever made it out of these mountains. "How do we perform the ritual?" I asked Tommy. The creature roared and charged our protective circle, claws extended. The wooden stakes flared with blue light as it struck them, but I could see cracks spreading through the wood. We had minutes, maybe less. "The binding words have to be spoken in the deepest chamber," Tommy said urgently, "while someone maintains the protective circle, but the warden has to stay behind to keep the seals strong." I made my choice. The ritual worked, but it cost us everything I'd thought I knew about the world. Tommy spoke the Welsh binding words while I held the creature at bay with the mining lamp. The bright light caused it real pain, forcing it back into the deepest part of the cave system. As the ancient phrases echoed through the tunnels, blue fire spread across the walls, creating new protective symbols that burned themselves into the living rock. The creature's roars shook the entire mountain as the binding took hold. I could feel its supernatural strength being contained, pulled down into the earth where it had been imprisoned for centuries before the miners accidentally freed it. But someone had to stay. The ritual required a warden to maintain the seals and ensure the creature remained trapped. Tommy volunteered. It was his family's traditional responsibility, passed down from the survivors of the 1923 cave-in. I led the Henderson family out through the tunnels, while Tommy established his watch post near the sealed chamber. Martin was unconscious but alive, and we managed to get him to medical attention. The official report listed the incident as a bear attack with complications from mine gas exposure. Martin never spoke about what really happened in those tunnels. The mine entrance was permanently sealed with concrete and steel, marked as a geological hazard zone to keep casual explorers away. But Tommy remained nearby in a small cabin, maintaining the traditional watch that his family had kept for 2 generations. That was 6 months ago. I've been transferred to a different section of the forest, officially for routine rotation, but really because my superiors think the stress affected my judgment. My new territory is safe, predictable, filled with normal wildlife that behaves according to natural laws. But I've started studying Appalachian folklore seriously, learning about the protective traditions that mountain families maintained long before government agencies took over land management. I carry a blessed Welsh cross on all my field operations now, and I've developed contacts among the old families who remember when the forest was a more dangerous place. Because Tommy as Briggs is no longer answering his radio checks. Last week, seismic monitors detected unusual underground activity near Raven's Peak. Movement in the deep mine shafts that should have been empty. And yesterday morning, a hiker found livestock remains arranged in a perfect circle around a tree, just like the killings that started this nightmare. I'm requesting transfer back to the Raven's Peak area. Officially, I want to investigate reports of renewed predator activity. Unofficially, I think the binding ritual may be failing, and if Tommy can't maintain the seals alone, someone has to help him. The mountain families have been watching these creatures for generations, keeping them contained through knowledge passed down in secret from parents to children. Government bureaucracy doesn't acknowledge the supernatural threats that exist in America's wilderness areas, but that doesn't make them any less real. There are other sealed mines throughout the Appalachian region. Other creatures that were imprisoned by people who understood the true dangers hidden beneath the earth. And the protective traditions are being forgotten as the old families die out and modern civilization dismisses their warnings as folklore. I've been in contact with park rangers from Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania who've encountered similar unexplained incidents near abandoned mining areas. We're developing an unofficial network, sharing information and traditional protective methods that might save lives when the normal protocols fail. If you're reading this and you work in wilderness management, pay attention to local folklore about sealed mines and buried dangers. The stories may sound like superstition, but they're often the only record of previous encounters with things that don't belong in any wildlife manual. And if you're planning to explore abandoned mining areas in the Appalachian Mountains, remember that some things were buried for good reason. Not all cave-ins were accidents. Some were desperate attempts to contain threats that couldn't be killed by conventional means. I'm heading back to Ravens Peak tomorrow, carrying Tommy's family journal and a backpack full of protective symbols carved by hands that knew these mountains before they were tamed. The seismic activity has been increasing every night, and the metallic scraping sounds are back. Whatever happens, I won't let the beast of Ravens Peak hunt freely in my forest again. Some responsibilities are too important to pass on to the next generation. The mountain is calling me home. My name is Samuel Blackwood, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger for 20 years now, patrolling the Blue Ridge Parkway here in Virginia. Most folks think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires, but when you work the night shift like I do, you see a different side of these mountains. I'm 44 years old, been a widower for 3 years now, since my wife Sarah passed. My 2 kids are grown and moved away. Emma's a teacher in Richmond, and Michael's in the Army. It's just me in these mountains most nights, and that's fine by me. My granddaddy worked these hills, and my daddy did too. The Blackwoods have been watching over this part of Virginia for 3 generations. 20 years of night patrol taught me every sound these mountains make. I know the difference between a screech owl and a fox cry. I can tell when the weather's about to turn, just by how the wind moves through the trees. I've seen ball lightning dance across the ridges and watched swamp gas glow in the low places. But I never believed in witch lights until I followed one and found what was left of the missing hikers. It was September 1992, during the harvest moon. We'd been having strange weather that month, thick fog that wouldn't lift even when the skies were clear everywhere else. The fog seemed to love one particular valley we call Shadow Hollow, a deep cut between 2 ridges about 12 miles from the nearest paved road. No cell phone coverage back then, and the radio barely worked down in that hollow. Shadow Hollow got its name for good reason. Even on sunny days, it stayed dim and misty down there. The old-timers had stories about the place, said it used to be a settlement back in the 1890s, but everyone just up and vanished one night. 23 families, gone without a trace. Course, I figured that was just mountain talk, the kind of stories that grow taller with each telling. But I knew the hollow was strange. The wildlife avoided it, no deer trails leading in, no bird songs coming out. Even my old hunting dog Rufus would whine and pull back when we got near the entrance. There were ruins scattered throughout the valley, stone foundations, and collapsed cabins covered in moss and vines. In the center, there was a natural spring that fed into some marshy ground. Sometimes you could see little flames dancing over the water, but I knew that was just methane from the rotting plants. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The trouble started when a group of paranormal investigators decided Shadow Hollow would be perfect for their ghost hunting show. 4 college kids from some university up north, all excited about their fancy cameras and electronic gadgets. They had a YouTube channel called Midnight Mysteries, with about 50,000 followers, which seemed like a lot back then. They came to the ranger station on a Friday afternoon, all eager smiles and expensive equipment. The leader was a girl named Jessica Chen, maybe 22, with short black hair and bright eyes. She showed me their permits and explained they wanted to camp in Shadow Hollow for the weekend. "We've heard the stories about the witch lights," she said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Our research shows there were accusations of witchcraft in the 1,890 seconds, and locals still report seeing unexplained lights in the valley. We want to document whatever's really happening down there." I tried to talk them out of it, told them the terrain was dangerous, that the fog could make navigation impossible, that they'd be completely cut off from any help if something went wrong. But they had their permits, and they were adults. All I could do was make them promise to check in by radio every 4 hours and be back at the trailhead by Sunday evening. That was my first mistake. Sunday evening came and went. No sign of the investigation team. No radio contact since Saturday morning when Jessica had called in to say they'd found some really interesting ruins and were setting up their equipment for the night. Monday morning, I hiked down into Shadow Hollow with my partner Jake Morrison. Jake was younger than me, maybe 30, and he'd only been ranging for 5 years. Good kid, though. Careful and smart. We figured we'd find the team with dead camera batteries and maybe some good ghost stories to tell. The fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it. Even with our flashlights, we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The air felt heavy and damp, like breathing through wet cotton. And it was cold. Maybe 40 degrees colder than it should have been for September. We found their camp about 2 miles into the valley, near the ruins of what used to be a church. Their tents were still standing, perfectly arranged. The campfire had burned down to cold ashes, but their food was still sitting out. Sandwiches that looked fresh, coffee in metal cups that was still warm to the touch. "That's weird," Jake said, picking up one of the cups. "This coffee can't be more than an hour old, but they've been missing since Saturday." Their cameras were still running, red lights blinking in the dim morning light. Thousands of dollars worth of equipment just sitting there, unguarded. Jessica's backpack was right where she'd left it, wallet and car keys still inside. But no people. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from camp. I keyed my radio to call it in, but all I got was static mixed with what sounded like whispering voices. The GPS unit on my belt was spinning wildly, showing our location as somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. "Equipment's all messed up," I told Jake. "Let's check the cameras. See if they recorded anything useful." Jake pulled out one of the digital cameras and hit playback. The tiny screen showed normal footage for the first few hours. The team setting up camp, joking around, talking to the camera about their plans. Then, around midnight, something changed. The camera was pointing toward the marshy area near the spring when a small light appeared. Just a tiny blue-green glow, like a firefly. But as we watched, more lights joined it. Dozens of them, floating a few feet off the ground, moving in slow circles around the camp. "Swamp gas," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. "Methane ignition. Happens all the time in wetlands." But Jake was staring at the screen. "Sam, look at this. Watch how they move." He was right. The lights weren't flickering randomly like gas fires. They were moving with purpose, forming patterns, almost like they were dancing. And they seemed to respond to the investigators. When Jessica pointed her flashlight at them, they pulled back. When she dimmed it, they came closer. On the tiny camera screen, we could see Jessica and her team getting excited, following the lights deeper into the ruins. The camera kept recording even after they disappeared from view, showing the empty camp for hours until the screen went black. "Their other cameras might have more footage," Jake said. We gathered up all the equipment and started the hike back to headquarters. But as we reached the edge of the valley, Jake stopped and grabbed my arm. "Sam, look." He was pointing back toward the hollow. Even in the daylight, even through the fog, we could see a faint glow coming from somewhere deep in the valley. Not the warm yellow light of a campfire or the white beam of a flashlight. This was the same blue-green glow we'd seen in the camera. And it was moving. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 20 years of night patrol, and I'd never seen anything like that. My hand moved automatically to the emergency flares on my belt, and I noticed Jake doing the same thing. "Let's get out of here," I said. We made it back to the station just as the afternoon fog started rolling in. I called the sheriff's department and reported 4 missing persons. They said they'd send a search team in the morning, weather permitting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that warm coffee and those moving lights, about the way the GPS had gone crazy and the radio had filled with whispers. about how my dog Rufus was hiding under the porch, whining like something was hunting him. Around midnight, I got up and looked out my window toward Shadow Hollow. Even from 5 miles away, I could see a faint glow coming from the valley. As I watched, the light seemed to pulse, like a slow heartbeat. That's when I knew those kids weren't just lost. Something in that hollow had taken them. And it wasn't done hunting. The search team found more than we bargained for. 6 deputies, 2 tracking dogs, and a volunteer rescue squad spread out through Shadow Hollow at first light. The fog had lifted enough to make the search possible. But the place still felt wrong. The dogs kept whining and pulling away from certain areas, and more than one deputy mentioned feeling like they were being watched. We found Jessica's backpack first, hanging 15 feet up in an old oak tree. No way it got there by accident. Someone or something had deliberately placed it in those branches. Inside, everything was still there except her camera's memory card. 2 hours later, we found something that made my blood run cold. At the base of a limestone cliff, arranged in a perfect circle, were human bones. Old bones, yellow with age, but arranged like someone had carefully placed each one. In the center of the circle was a newer bone, a femur that couldn't have been there more than a few days. The bones were glowing. Not bright, just a faint blue-green phosphorescence that you could only see in the shadows. When Deputy Clark tried to touch one with a stick, the glow pulsed brighter. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, backing away. "What is this?" Sheriff Martinez called off the search and ordered everyone out of the valley. But before we left, I did something that probably saved my life. I took pictures. My old Polaroid camera worked fine, unlike all the digital equipment that kept malfunctioning. That evening, I drove to the county library and pulled up the old newspaper archives. What I found made me wish I'd never heard of Shadow Hollow. The 13th of October, 1894. The headline read, "Entire settlement vanishes from Shadow Hollow, witchcraft suspected." According to the article, 23 families had lived in the valley throughout the 1,890 seconds. They were mostly Scots-Irish immigrants, hardworking folks trying to make a living in the mountains. But in October 1894, a traveling preacher came through and accused an old woman named Granny Miller of practicing witchcraft. The article said strange things had been happening in the valley. Livestock dying mysteriously, children getting sick with no cause, and floating lights seen in the marshes at night. The preacher convinced the settlers that Granny Miller was responsible. They dragged her from her cabin and executed her near the natural spring. According to the newspaper, her last words were a curse. "I'll claim every soul that enters my valley, and their lights will join mine in the darkness." 3 days later, every person in Shadow Hollow vanished. The search parties found empty cabins, cold fireplaces, and meals half-eaten on tables. But no people, no bodies, nothing. Just like Jessica and her team. I was reading this when my partner Jake burst through the library doors. "Sam, we got a problem," he said, breathing hard. 3 more people are missing. Another paranormal investigation team had snuck into Shadow Hollow that afternoon, ignoring the sheriff's barriers. College kids from Virginia Tech, with homemade ghost hunting equipment, they'd been posting on social media about solving the mystery of the witch lights, right up until their posts stopped around sunset. This time, the sheriff wasn't waiting until morning. He was organizing a night search with floodlights and generators, asked for volunteers with local knowledge of the terrain. I should have said no, should have told him about Granny Miller's curse and those glowing bones. But 3 more people were missing, and if there was any chance they were still alive. That's how I found myself hiking back into Shadow Hollow at 10 o'clock on a moonless night, carrying a high-powered flashlight and enough flares to light up half the valley. The fog was so thick we couldn't see our own feet. The floodlights the sheriff had brought were useless. The beam couldn't penetrate more than a few yards into that soup. Within an hour, we'd lost radio contact with each other, even though we were supposed to be staying close together. I was following what I thought was a hiking trail when I saw the first light. It started as just a tiny glow off to my left, maybe 50 yards away through the fog. Blue-green, hovering about 4 feet off the ground, perfectly still. I called out to it, thinking it might be another searcher's flashlight. The light pulsed once, bright enough to see clearly, then started moving away from me. I followed it. That was my second mistake. The light moved slowly, stopping every few yards like it was waiting for me to catch up. Whenever I got close, it would drift a little further away, always staying just at the edge of my vision. I knew I should turn back, should try to regroup with the search team, but something about that light was hypnotic. I felt like I needed to follow it, like it was important. After maybe 20 minutes of this deadly game of follow the leader, the light stopped moving. I found myself in a small clearing I'd never seen before, surrounded by the ruins of old cabins. And I wasn't alone. More lights were appearing, dozens of them, rising from the ground and floating through the air like ethereal jellyfish. They moved in slow, graceful patterns, circling the clearing in a dance that was both beautiful and terrifying. That's when I saw the faces. Inside each light, faint but unmistakable, was a human face. Some were old and weathered, like they'd been there for decades. Others looked fresh, scared, with wide eyes and open mouths as if they were screaming silently. I recognized one of them, Jessica Chen, the leader of the first missing team. Her face floated inside a bright blue orb, her expression frozen in eternal terror. The light started moving toward me. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Wherever the light hit them, the orbs retreated slightly, but they kept coming. I could hear something now, not with my ears, but inside my head. Voices whispering, pleading, warning me to run. But my legs felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. The air around me was getting colder, and I could see my breath steaming in the flashlight beam. One of the orbs drifted close enough that I could feel its chill against my face. That's when I heard Jake calling my name. His voice broke the spell. I managed to turn and run toward the sound, crashing through briars and stumbling over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear the lights following, not making any sound of their own, but somehow I knew they were there. I found Jake standing at the edge of the clearing, his face pale in the glow of his flashlight. "Sam, thank God," he said. "I've been looking for you for an hour. The sheriff called off the search. We need to get out of here." But Jake looked strange. His eyes were too bright, and he was smiling in a way that didn't match the fear in his voice. "Come on," he said, turning away from me. "I found something you need to see. The other team. I think I know where they are." He started walking deeper into the valley, toward the old spring where Granny Miller had died. And as he walked, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Jake wasn't casting a shadow in my flashlight beam. "Jake, stop," I called out, but my voice sounded strange in the thick fog. He kept walking, moving with that unnatural smooth gait that didn't look quite right. I followed at a distance, my flashlight beam focused on his back. The deeper we went into Shadow Hollow, the colder it got. My breath was coming in heavy clouds now, and frost was forming on the metal parts of my equipment. We reached the natural spring where, according to the old newspaper, Granny Miller had been executed over a century ago. The area was different than I remembered. The marshy ground was glowing with that same blue-green phosphorescence, and the spring itself seemed to bubble more actively, like it was boiling. Jake turned around to face me, and I saw what had happened to my partner. His face was translucent. I could see the fog and darkness through his skin, and his eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the witch lights. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came from somewhere else entirely, a dry, crackling sound like autumn leaves. "He's safe with me now, Ranger," the thing wearing Jake's face said. "They're all safe. No more pain, no more worry, no more fear. Just the eternal dance in my valley." More lights began appearing around the spring, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, rising from the marshy ground and floating through the air. As they came closer, I could see the faces trapped inside each one. Jessica and her team. The Virginia Tech students. Jake's real face, mouth open in a silent scream. And older faces too, men and women in old-fashioned clothes, their expressions frozen in the moment their souls were trapped. 23 families, taken on the same night over a century ago. At the center of it all, the largest light began to take shape. It formed the outline of an old woman, tall and thin, with wild gray hair and hands like claws. Her face was ancient and full of rage, her eyes burning with supernatural fire. "Granny Miller," I whispered. "They condemned me for using the old ways," she said, her voice echoing from every direction at once. "Called me witch, called me devil. But I was only trying to help, trying to heal their sick children and protect their crops. This was my thanks, death by hanging, my body thrown in unhallowed ground." The ground around the spring began to glow brighter. I could see bones underneath the marshy surface, dozens of skeletons arranged in ritual patterns. So I made them understand, she continued. Made them all join me in my valley, and every soul that enters my domain becomes part of my eternal congregation. The witch lights began moving toward me, slowly encircling me like they had in the clearing. I could feel my life energy being drawn out, pulled toward those floating orbs of captured souls. My vision was getting dim, and my legs felt weak. That's when I remembered something from my childhood. My grandmother, who'd grown up in these mountains, used to tell stories about protection against evil spirits. She'd shown me an old railroad spike she kept by her front door, said iron was the best defense against things that shouldn't be in our world. I had an iron railroad spike in my emergency kit. Found it years ago while cleaning up an old trail and kept it as a good luck charm. With hands that shook from cold and fear, I pulled the spike from my pack. The moment iron touched my skin, the witch lights recoiled with a sound like breaking glass. Iron burns the unnatural, I said, remembering my grandmother's words. And this valley doesn't belong to you anymore. Granny Miller's ghostly form wavered and shrieked with rage. You cannot banish me from my own land. I am bound to this place by blood and bone. But I was already moving toward the spring, holding the iron spike high. Where its shadow fell, the glowing marsh dimmed, and the floating souls grew brighter, as if they were fighting to break free from the witch's control. You want to stay bound to this place? I shouted over her screams. Then stay properly buried. I drove the iron spike deep into the ground at the center of the spring, right where the bones were thickest underneath the marshy soil. The moment iron pierced the earth, everything changed. The witch lights exploded outward like fireworks, releasing their trapped souls in brilliant flashes of white light. Granny Miller's form became solid for just a moment, solid enough for me to see the rope burns on her neck, the hatred in her eyes, and then the sudden fear as she realized what was happening. No, she screamed. You don't understand. Without me to guard this valley, worse things will come, ancient things that sleep in the deep mountains. But it was too late. The iron spike had disrupted whatever curse bound her to Shadow Hollow. Her form began to dissolve, pulled down into the earth like water down a drain. The fog lifted all at once. The supernatural cold vanished. And scattered around the spring, I found Jake and the 7 missing investigators, unconscious but alive. They were all pale as ghosts and weak as newborns, but they were breathing. The official report blamed everything on methane gas exposure. According to the Park Service, natural gas seeping from underground deposits had caused hallucinations and disorientation, leading to the temporary disappearance of the investigation teams. The phosphorescent glow was attributed to a rare type of bacteria that thrives in oxygen-poor environments. Jake and the others recovered fully, but none of them remembered anything after entering Shadow Hollow. The doctor said this was normal for severe gas poisoning. The brain simply doesn't form memories during episodes of oxygen deprivation. Shadow Hollow was declared off-limits due to dangerous natural gas concentrations. They put up new signs, stronger barriers, and regular patrols to keep people out. Most visitors accepted the scientific explanation and stayed away from the valley. But the locals knew better. Within a week of Granny Miller's banishment, families throughout the mountains began coming forward with their own stories. 3 generations of careful silence broken, because word had gotten out that someone had finally dealt with the witch of Shadow Hollow. Old Martha Hensley brought me a journal her grandfather had kept, documenting strange lights and disappearances throughout the region dating back to the 1800s. Tom Bradley told me about the bones his family had been secretly reburying for decades, found scattered in unnatural patterns after certain kinds of storms. I learned that there was an entire network of mountain families who'd been quietly dealing with supernatural problems for over a century. They had their own methods, their own protections, their own understanding of what lived in the deep hollows and old places of Appalachia, and they accepted me into that network. I started carrying iron nails on all my patrols. Martha taught me the old prayers and protective rituals. The local families shared their maps of dangerous areas and the dates when ancient things grew restless. Shadow Hollow stayed quiet after that night. The spring ran clear, the fog lifted, and even the wildlife began returning to the valley. The bones I'd found were given proper burial in the town cemetery, and a small marker was placed for Granny Miller herself, not to honor her, but to make sure she stayed at rest. But my work was far from over. 2 weeks later, hikers reported strange lights in Beaver Creek Valley, 30 miles south of Shadow Hollow. Local records showed another witch trial there in 1889, another accused woman executed by frightened settlers, another curse laid on the land. I've been assigned to night patrol in that area starting tomorrow. The funny thing is, I'm not scared anymore. 20 years of thinking I understood these mountains, and it turns out I'd barely scratched the surface. There are old powers sleeping in the deep hollows, ancient agreements between the mountain families, and things that were here long before any of us. My job isn't just protecting hikers from getting lost or keeping campers from starting forest fires. I'm part of something bigger now. A line of defense between the modern world and the old darkness that still moves through these mountains. Some nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the temperature drops for no reason, I still see faint glows in my peripheral vision. But they're different now, not hunting lights, but warning lights, letting me know when something unnatural is stirring in the darkness. Last week, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. She'd heard about what happened in Shadow Hollow through the unofficial network. Seems they've got their own problem with a cursed valley and missing campers. She asked if I'd be willing to come down and take a look. I told her I'd drive down next weekend. After all, these mountains have been my family's responsibility for 3 generations. Some things don't change, even when you learn there's a lot more to protect people from than you ever imagined. If you ever find yourself camping in the Appalachian Mountains and you see strange lights floating through the valleys at night, remember this: some lights are meant to guide you to safety, but others are meant to lead you away from it. Trust your instincts, carry iron, and never, ever follow a light that doesn't cast a shadow. Because in these old mountains, some things that died long ago are still very much hungry. My name is Michael O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a park ranger for 15 years now, working mostly with kids in the Jefferson National Forest here in Virginia. Before this job, I taught 3rd grade for 5 years. I guess you could say I've always been good with children. I love my work. There's something special about watching a city kid see a wild deer for the first time, or helping a shy student find the courage to cross a creek on stepping stones. My wife Sarah always jokes that I never really stopped being a teacher. I just moved my classroom outside. We live in a small town called Copper Creek, about 20 minutes from the forest. Sarah works at the local bank, and we have 3 kids of our own: Katie, who's 6, Tommy, who's 4, and baby Emma, who just turned 2. Katie is my shadow whenever I'm home. She begs me to take her hiking every weekend, and I usually give in. She's fearless in the woods, just like I was at her age. Pine Mountain has always been one of my favorite spots to bring school groups. It sits about 8 miles back from the main road, connected by an old logging trail that's perfect for teaching kids about forest history. The mountain itself isn't very tall, maybe 2,800 feet, but it's steep and wild. Second-growth pines cover most of the slopes, mixed with oak and maple trees that turn amazing colors in the fall. What makes Pine Mountain special is the history. Back in the 1932, there was a logging camp up there, complete with worker cabins and even a one-room schoolhouse for the loggers' children. The camp only lasted about 5 years before the lumber company moved on, but you can still see the foundations if you know where to look. The schoolhouse is the best preserved building. 3 walls are still standing, made of local stone that's held up well over the decades. The roof is long gone, and vines grow through the windows, but you can still see where the blackboard hung and where the little wooden desks sat in rows. Kids love exploring it, imagining what school was like back then. Local folks have always left things at the schoolhouse: flowers, small toys, sometimes a teddy bear or 2. It started as a memorial tradition, though most people today don't know exactly why. The old-timers in town know the story, but they don't talk about it much. I never paid much attention to those stories until May of 1988. That month changed everything for me. It had been raining for almost 2 weeks straight. The creek that runs past the schoolhouse was higher than I'd ever seen it, brown with mud and moving fast. I'd already canceled 3 school trips because of the weather, and the teachers were getting frustrated. Spring is the best time for outdoor education, and we were running out of good days before summer break. When the rain finally stopped on May 15th, I got a call from Margaret Torres at Riverside Elementary. She had 28 4th graders who'd been looking forward to their Pine Mountain trip for months. Could we possibly reschedule for the next day? I checked the weather forecast. Partly cloudy with no rain expected. The creek would still be high, but manageable. I told her we could do it, but we'd have to be extra careful around the water. The next morning was beautiful. Clear blue sky, temperature in the low 70s, just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. Perfect hiking weather. I met the group at the trailhead at 9 o'clock sharp. Mrs. Torres, 2 parent volunteers, 28 excited kids, and me. One of those kids was Emma Rodriguez. 8 years old, bright smile, always asking questions about everything she saw. Her mom, Rosa, was one of the parent volunteers. She'd never been hiking before and was a little nervous about the whole thing. Emma kept reassuring her that Mr. O'Sullivan knew what he was doing. "My dad says park rangers are like superheroes for trees," Emma told her mom as we started up the trail. We made good time to Pine Mountain. The kids were excited but well-behaved, staying on the trail and listening when I pointed out interesting plants or animal tracks. We reached the schoolhouse ruins around 11:30. This is always my favorite part of the program. I have the kids sit in a circle where the old desks used to be, and I tell them about the logging camp, how families lived up here year-round, how the children walked to school every morning just like they did, how different life was without electricity or running water. Then I let them explore the ruins for a while before lunch. They love looking for artifacts, old square nails, pieces of broken pottery, sometimes a rusty tin can. I always warn them not to pick anything up without showing me first, and to be careful around the foundation stones. Emma was particularly fascinated by the schoolhouse. She spent most of our exploration time sitting on what used to be the front steps, staring into the empty building. "What are you thinking about?" I asked her. "I wonder if the kids who went to school here were scared when it stormed," she said. "There's no roof anymore. But back then they would have been safe inside." "I'm sure they were," I told her. Teachers always take good care of their students. We had lunch at picnic tables I'd set up near the creek. The water was still running high and fast, so I made sure everyone stayed well back from the bank. At 12:30, I told the kids they had 15 minutes of free time before we'd start the hike back down. That's when Emma disappeared. I've led over 200 school trips, and I've never lost a child, not once. I have a system, buddy pairs, regular head counts, clear boundaries. Every kid knows to stay where they can see me or Mrs. Torres. At 12:45, I blew my whistle for group formation. 27 kids came running. Emma wasn't among them. "Emma," I called, no answer. Mrs. Torres did a quick count while I checked the area around our lunch spot. Rosa Rodriguez looked confused. "She was just here a minute ago," Rosa said. "She asked if she could look for more artifacts near the schoolhouse." I told her to stay close. "Emma Rodriguez," I shouted, using my teacher voice that could carry across a playground. Nothing. I sent Mrs. Torres and the other parent volunteer back down the trail with the rest of the group, with strict instructions to wait at the parking area. Rosa and I would find Emma and catch up. We searched everywhere, the schoolhouse ruins, the old cabin foundations, every pile of rocks big enough to hide behind. I called her name until my voice was hoarse. Rosa was trying not to panic, but I could see the fear building in her eyes. "She knows better than to wander off," Rosa kept saying. "Emma always follows the rules." After an hour, I radioed for help. Within 30 minutes, we had 6 more rangers, a K-9 unit, and a sheriff's deputy on the mountain. Standard lost child protocol. Establish a perimeter. Work outward from the last known location. Check every possible hiding spot. That's when things got strange. The search dogs found Emma's scent trail leading from our lunch area toward the schoolhouse. Then the trail just stopped. Not faded, stopped, like she'd simply vanished into thin air. "That's not possible," said Ranger Collins, who'd brought his German Shepherd Max. "This dog could track a rabbit through a thunderstorm. There's got to be more trail somewhere." But there wasn't. Max circled the schoolhouse ruins 3 times, whining and backing away from the entrance. He'd never acted like that before. Around 4 o'clock, 2 of the kids from our group came back up the trail with Mrs. Torres. They'd been crying and wanted to help look for Emma. "We saw her," said Jason Peters, a quiet boy who rarely spoke up. "She was playing with other kids by the old school." "What other kids?" I asked. There hadn't been any other children on the mountain. "There were lots of them," said Amy Chen. "Maybe 10 or 12. They were playing tag around the building." Mrs. Torres looked confused. There weren't any other school groups scheduled today. I checked. They weren't wearing regular clothes, Jason continued. They had on old-fashioned stuff, like in the history books. You probably saw Emma playing by herself, I told them. Sometimes when we're worried, our imagination can play tricks on us. But Amy shook her head firmly. No, Mr. O'Sullivan, there were other kids. Emma was laughing and running with them. Then they all went into the schoolhouse together. Rosa grabbed my arm. If she's in there, why didn't we find her? We searched the schoolhouse ruins again. There's not much to search. Just 3 walls and some scattered foundation stones. No basement, no hidden rooms, nowhere for a child to hide. Emma simply wasn't there. As evening approached, we had to call off the active search. I radioed for a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment to arrive first thing in the morning. Rosa was beside herself, and her husband Miguel had driven up from town to help look. She's never done anything like this, Rosa kept saying. Emma doesn't wander off. She doesn't break rules. I stayed on the mountain that night, along with Deputy Harrison and Ranger Collins. We took shifts walking the area with powerful flashlights, calling Emma's name every few minutes. Around midnight, I was sitting on the schoolhouse steps, trying to think of anywhere we might have missed, when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Children's laughter. Faint, but definitely there, coming from somewhere in the forest around the schoolhouse. Light, happy laughter, like kids playing at recess. Collins, I called on my radio. Do you hear that? Hear what? The laughter stopped. Never mind, I said, but I kept listening. A few minutes later, it started again. Definitely children's voices, but I couldn't tell which direction they were coming from. The sound seemed to echo off the mountains. I stood up and walked toward the tree line, following my ears. The laughter got louder, and I could almost make out individual voices. Then I heard something that stopped me dead. Come play with us, Emma. The game isn't over yet. It was a little girl's voice, clear as day. But there were no little girls on Pine Mountain, except for the one we couldn't find. Emma, I shouted. Emma, where are you? Silence. I grabbed my biggest flashlight and plunged into the trees, sweeping the beam back and forth. Nothing but pine trunks and shadows. The laughter had stopped completely. When I got back to the schoolhouse, Deputy Harrison was waiting for me. Any luck? He asked. Thought I heard something, I said. I didn't mention the voices. It sounded crazy, even to me. Harrison nodded. These mountains can play tricks on you at night. Sound carries funny up here. The next morning brought the helicopter, more searchers, and news crews. Emma Rodriguez had been missing for almost 20 hours. The story was spreading. Second grader vanishes in National Forest. Rosa and Miguel gave interviews, begging anyone with information to come forward. I was coordinating with the helicopter pilot when one of the volunteer searchers came running toward me. Ranger O'Sullivan, you need to see this. He led me back to the schoolhouse ruins. There, sitting neatly on the stone steps where I'd been sitting the night before, was Emma's bright pink backpack. That wasn't here before, I said. We checked this area a dozen times. I know, said the volunteer. I was here an hour ago. The steps were empty. Rosa started crying when she saw the backpack. Inside were Emma's lunchbox, her notebook, her pencils, and something that made no sense at all. A child's drawing, done in crayon on notebook paper. It showed a group of children playing in front of a building that looked exactly like the schoolhouse. Except in the drawing, the building had a roof and windows and looked brand new. There were 17 children in the picture, all holding hands in a circle. At the bottom of the page, in Emma's careful third-grade handwriting, were the words, "My new friends want me to stay for school." The FBI got involved after we found the backpack. Agent Sarah Kim, a specialist in missing children cases, flew down from D.C. She was all business, dark suit, serious expression, the kind of person who dealt in facts, not theories. Tell me about this drawing, she said, studying Emma's picture with a magnifying glass. Emma's always been artistic, Rosa explained. She draws constantly, but I've never seen her draw anything like this. Agent Kim counted the figures in the drawing. 17 children, that's very specific. Does the number 17 mean anything to you? Nobody had an answer. What about the building? This looks like the schoolhouse ruins, but with a complete structure. Has Emma seen pictures of what it looked like originally? I shook my head. There aren't any pictures. The logging company didn't keep records like that. So how would she know what the building looked like when it was intact? Another question none of us could answer. Agent Kim interviewed Jason and Amy again, the kids who claimed to have seen Emma with other children. Their story never changed. They insisted they'd seen a group of kids in old-fashioned clothes playing around the schoolhouse. "Can you describe the clothes?" Agent Kim asked. "The boys wore short pants and suspenders," Jason said. "The girls had long dresses. Like in the old movies my grandma watches." "And you're certain these weren't other children from your school?" "No, ma'am," Amy said. "I know all the kids in our grade. These were different kids, younger, mostly. And they looked." She paused, trying to find the right words. "They looked how?" Agent Kim prompted. "Old-timey," Amy said finally. "That afternoon, I got a call from Grace Patterson, the local historian who ran the county museum. She'd heard about Emma's disappearance on the news and wanted to help. "There's something about Pine Mountain you should know," Grace said. "Something that happened a long time ago." We met at her office in town. Grace was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, with the kind of memory that stored every detail of local history. She pulled out a cardboard box filled with old newspapers and documents. "May 16th, 1934, she said, spreading a yellowed newspaper across her desk. "Exactly 54 years ago yesterday." The headline read, "Flash Flood Kills 17 Children at Logging Camp School." I felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. Grace continued reading. "A sudden thunderstorm caused Pine Creek to overflow its banks, flooding the one-room schoolhouse where 17 children were attending classes. The children and their teacher, Miss Sarah Whitman, were trapped when debris blocked the only exit. All were drowned." 17 children, I whispered, thinking of Emma's drawing. "The same number Emma drew," Grace nodded. "And there's more. According to survivor accounts, the children were last seen playing outside during their lunch break, just before the storm hit." She showed me a list of names and ages. The youngest victim had been 5 years old. The oldest was 11. All of them from logging families. All of them attending the little mountain school that no longer existed. "After the flood, strange reports started coming in," Grace said. "People claimed to hear children's voices near the ruins. Hikers reported seeing kids playing around the old schoolhouse site, always at a distance, always disappearing when approached." "Ghost stories," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Maybe, but the reports never stopped. Every few years, someone claims to see the children. Always the same description. Kids in 1930 clothes, playing around the schoolhouse ruins." Agent Kim was skeptical when I told her about Grace's research. "Coincidences happen, Ranger O'Sullivan. The date, the number of children, it's strange, but it doesn't explain where Emma Rodriguez is now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma's drawing, about the children's laughter I'd heard, about the way the search dogs had acted around the schoolhouse. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to rest and drove back to Pine Mountain. I told myself I was just going to do one more search, check areas we might have missed. But really, I needed to see the place again. Something was bothering me, some detail I couldn't quite put my finger on. The mountain was silent, except for the sound of Pine Creek, still running high from all the rain. I parked at the trailhead and hiked up by flashlight. When I reached the schoolhouse ruins, I stopped cold. There were toys scattered around the stone steps. Small, old-fashioned toys, a wooden hoop, a rag doll, a set of marbles. They definitely hadn't been there during the day's search. I approached carefully, sweeping my flashlight beam over each item. The toys looked genuinely old, not like modern reproductions. The doll's dress was faded and torn. The wooden hoop was carved by hand. The marbles were made of real glass, not plastic. Then I heard the voices. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." Children singing, somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. The old playground song echoed off the mountains, clear and sweet. "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Silence. My hands were shaking as I raised the flashlight, trying to pierce the darkness between the trees. "Hello," I called. "Is someone there?" A little girl's voice answered from the shadows. "We're here, Mr. O'Sullivan. We're always here." The voice was coming from inside the schoolhouse ruins. I walked through the gap where the door used to be, my flashlight beam dancing across the stone walls. The interior was empty except for a few scattered leaves and the old memorial toys that visitors had left over the years. Emma, I called. Emma, is that you? Emma's learning her lessons, said a different child's voice. This one sounded like a boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Miss Whitman says she can join our class if she wants. Where is Emma? I asked the empty room. In the school, of course, where children belong. I spun around, trying to locate the voices. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Show yourselves, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. And they did. They materialized slowly, like morning mist taking shape. First one child, then another, then more. 17 children in old-fashioned clothes, standing in neat rows as if posing for a class picture. They looked solid, real, alive. At the front of the group stood a woman in a long gray dress. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. In her hands, she held a piece of chalk and a slate board. "Good evening, Ranger O'Sullivan," she said in a soft Southern accent. "I am Miss Sarah Whitman. These are my students." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The children were staring at me with curious, friendly faces. They looked perfectly normal, except for their old-fashioned clothes and the fact that they were translucent. I could see the stone wall through their bodies. "We've been waiting such a long time for new students," Miss Whitman continued. "Emma is a bright child. She'll fit in well with our class." "Where is Emma?" I managed to ask. Miss Whitman smiled. "Why, she's right here. Emma, dear, say hello to Mr. O'Sullivan." Emma Rodriguez stepped out from behind one of the other children. She looked exactly the same as when I'd last seen her, except her clothes had changed. Instead of her modern t-shirt and jeans, she wore a simple blue dress that looked like it belonged in the 1930s. "Hi, Mr. O'Sullivan," she said cheerfully. "Look, I'm going to school with my new friends. Miss Whitman is teaching us about arithmetic and geography and proper penmanship." "Emma, your parents are looking for you," I said. "Everyone's very worried." Emma looked confused. "But I have to finish my lessons. Miss Whitman says we can't leave until we complete our final examination." "Our school day was interrupted, you see," Miss Whitman explained. "In 1934, we were dismissed early due to inclement weather. The children never had a chance to finish their studies or receive their end-of-year certificates. They've been waiting to complete their education ever since." I understood then, with a clarity that was both terrible and sad. These children had died before finishing their last day of school. They'd been trapped here ever since, reliving that interrupted afternoon, waiting for someone to properly dismiss them for summer vacation. "Let her go," I said. "She doesn't belong here." "Oh, but she does," Miss Whitman said. "Emma wants to stay. Don't you, dear?" Emma nodded eagerly. "It's so much fun. We play games during recess, and Miss Whitman tells the best stories, and I'll never have to grow up and worry about grown-up things." One of the ghost children, a boy about Emma's age, stepped forward. "We've been so lonely," he said. "It's hard to play games with only dead children. Emma makes everything feel alive again." The temperature around the schoolhouse was dropping. I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. The ghost children were becoming more solid-looking, more real, while Emma was starting to look translucent. She was fading. "Emma, you have to come with me," I said urgently. "Your parents love you. Your family needs you." "But Miss Whitman says families just cause pain when they're separated," Emma replied. "Here, we'll always be together, always be children, always be safe." The sound of rushing water reached my ears. Pine Creek was rising again, even though there'd been no rain. I could hear it lapping at the foundations of the schoolhouse. Just like in 1934. "The final examination begins now," Miss Whitman announced, producing an old brass school bell from somewhere in her dress. She rang it 3 times, and the sound echoed strangely in the ruins. Water was seeping up through the foundation stones, forming puddles around our feet. The ghost children arranged themselves in neat rows, sitting cross-legged on the ground as if at invisible desks. Emma sat among them, her modern clothes completely gone now, replaced by a faded yellow dress and button-up shoes. "Emma, listen to me," I said, kneeling down to her eye level. "This isn't real school. These children are dead. They died here 54 years ago." Emma looked confused. "That's not true, Mr. O'Sullivan. Miss Whitman says we're special students who get to attend school forever. They're trying to make you like them," I explained. "If you stay here, you'll die too. Your parents will never see you again." Miss Whitman's voice cut through the darkness. Mr. O'Sullivan, please don't disrupt the class. The children must complete their lessons. The water was ankle-deep now, and rising fast. In the distance, I could hear thunder, though the sky had been clear when I arrived. Pine Creek was overflowing its banks, recreating the conditions that had killed these children decades ago. "We tried to leave once," said the boy who'd spoken before. His name tag read Thomas, age 9. "But the water came too fast. The door was blocked. Miss Whitman said we should stay calm and continue our lessons until help arrived." "Help never came," added a little girl with pigtails. "So we kept studying. We've been studying for so very long." The water reached my knees. Emma was still sitting with the ghost children, but now she was translucent enough that I could see the stone wall right through her body. She was becoming one of them. "Miss Whitman," I said, "these children need to be dismissed. They've been here long enough." The ghostly teacher looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "I cannot dismiss them until they complete their final examination. It is my duty as their teacher to ensure they receive a proper education." "What kind of examination?" I asked. "They must demonstrate that they have learned the most important lesson of all," Miss Whitman replied. "Which is? That love transcends death, that family bonds cannot be broken, that some things are worth more than eternal childhood." I understood. The examination wasn't about arithmetic or geography. It was about choosing between the safety of eternal childhood and the risks of real life, between the certainty of staying with Miss Whitman forever and the uncertainty of growing up in a world that could be painful and scary. The water was waist-deep now, and I was struggling to keep my footing. Emma was becoming harder to see, fading like an old photograph. "Emma," I called to her. "Do you remember your little sister? Tommy and baby Emma? Do you remember how your mom reads to you every night?" Emma looked up, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to clear. "Mommy always does different voices for the characters," she said softly. "That's right. And your dad? Remember how he teaches you to ride your bike in the park? He runs behind me so I won't fall," Emma whispered. "They're waiting for you to come home," I said. "They need their daughter back." Miss Whitman's voice was getting louder, more insistent. "Children, please focus on your lessons. Don't listen to the distractions." But several of the ghost children were also looking up, remembering. Thomas spoke first. "I had a baby brother. He was just learning to walk when the flood came. My mama made the best cornbread," said the girl with pigtails. "She promised to teach me the recipe when I got older." One by one, the ghost children began to remember their families, their lives before the schoolhouse. The spell that had kept them trapped in eternal childhood was weakening. "No," Miss Whitman cried, "you mustn't think about those things. They only cause pain. Here you are safe, here you are always together." But it was too late. The children were standing up from their invisible desks, looking around as if waking from a long dream. "We want to go home," Thomas said. "We want to see our families again," said the girl with pigtails. "But you can't," Miss Whitman said desperately. "They're all gone now, dead and buried. I'm the only family you have left." Emma was becoming solid again, her modern clothes returning. She looked at me with clear eyes. "Mr. O'Sullivan, I want to go home. I want to see my mommy and daddy." The water was chest-deep now, but something had changed. Instead of the murky brown floodwater I'd been expecting, it was crystal clear. I could see every stone on the bottom, every detail of the submerged foundations. Miss Whitman looked older suddenly, more tired. Her formal teacher's dress was faded and torn, and her kind face showed the strain of 54 years spent trying to protect children who were already beyond protection. "I failed them," she whispered. "I was supposed to keep them safe, and I failed. When the flood came, I couldn't save them. I couldn't save any of them." "You didn't fail," I told her. "You loved them. You stayed with them. But now it's time to let them go." "If I let them go, I'll be alone," Miss Whitman said. "I'll have to face what happened. I'll have to accept that I couldn't protect them." "Yes," I said, "but that's what teachers do. We prepare our students for the world, even knowing they'll face dangers we can't shield them from. We love them enough to let them grow up and make their own choices." Miss Whitman looked at her 17 students, her charges, who had been trapped by her guilt and love for more than half a century. Then she looked at Emma, alive and warm and ready to return to her family. "Children," she said in a voice that carried all the authority of a teacher and all the love of a mother, "you are dismissed. Class is over. Summer vacation may begin. The ghost children smiled, the first real smiles I'd seen from them. They began to fade, but this time it was different. They weren't disappearing into darkness. They were becoming light, becoming peace. "Thank you, Miss Whitman," Thomas said. "Thank you for staying with us." "We love you too," said the girl with pigtails, "but we're ready to go home now." One by one, they dissolved into gentle light that rose toward the clear night sky. Miss Whitman watched them go with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Goodbye, my dear students," she whispered. "Study hard in your next school." Then she looked at Emma and me. "Take good care of her, Ranger O'Sullivan. Children are precious gifts." "I will," I promised. Miss Whitman nodded once, then began to fade as well. But unlike her students, she didn't become light. She simply let go. The weight of 54 years of guilt and responsibility lifted from her shoulders, and she found the peace that had eluded her for so long. The water receded as quickly as it had risen. Within minutes, we were standing on dry ground again. Emma was completely solid, completely alive, wearing her original t-shirt and jeans. "Mr. O'Sullivan," she said in a small voice. "How long was I gone?" "About 36 hours, I told her. It felt like days and days. We had so many lessons. She looked around the empty schoolhouse ruins. "Where did everyone go?" "Home," I said. "They finally went home." The official report stated that Emma Rodriguez had become disoriented and taken shelter in a small cave during a brief thunderstorm. She was found unharmed but suffering from mild hypothermia and temporary memory loss due to the trauma. Agent Kim signed off on the report, though she gave me a long, searching look when she did. "Ranger O'Sullivan," she said privately, "Emma's story keeps changing. First she talks about being in school with other children, then she says she was alone in a cave. Her medical exam shows no signs of exposure to the elements. And that drawing, kids have active imaginations," I said, "especially after a scary experience." Agent Kim nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." She paused. "There's something else. We found 17 new memorial items around the schoolhouse ruins this morning. Small toys, all antiques. The local museum says they date to the 1932. "People leave memorial items there all the time," I said. "But these appeared overnight, Ranger O'Sullivan, and they're arranged in a perfect circle around the foundation, almost like what? Like someone was saying goodbye." Rosa and Miguel Rodriguez were so grateful to have Emma back that they didn't ask too many questions about where she'd been. Emma herself seemed to have trouble remembering details, which Dr. Martinez at the local hospital said was normal after a traumatic experience. But sometimes, when Emma thought no one was looking, I'd catch her staring off into the distance with a sad, thoughtful expression. When I asked her what she was thinking about, she'd say, "My friends who had to go away." 2 weeks after the incident, I brought my own family up to Pine Mountain for a picnic. Sarah packed sandwiches and cookies, and we made a day of it. Katie, my 6-year-old, was excited to see the place where Daddy worked. When we reached the schoolhouse ruins, Katie immediately started exploring. She picked up one of the memorial toys that visitors had left, a small wooden doll, and examined it carefully. "Daddy," she said, "who are all these toys for?" "They're for children who used to go to school here," I told her. Katie nodded seriously. Then she placed the wooden doll carefully back where she'd found it. "That's good. Children should have toys to play with." As we were packing up to leave, Katie ran back to the schoolhouse one more time. She stood in the doorway and called out, "Bye, have a good summer vacation." Her voice echoed off the mountains, but for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard other children's voices calling back, "Goodbye, see you next year." Sarah was buckling baby Emma into her car seat when she asked, "Mick, did you hear something just now?" "Just Katie being silly," I said. But that night, I called Grace Patterson at the museum. "Grace, I need to ask you about the memorial tradition at Pine Mountain. How long has it been going on?" "Oh, since right after the flood," Grace said. "Families of the victims started it. They'd hike up every year on the anniversary and leave flowers, maybe a small toy. It was their way of honoring the children's memory." "Every year?" "For about 20 years. Then the original families started dying off and the tradition faded. Though people still leave things occasionally." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about local customs," I said. What I didn't tell Grace was that I'd decided to make the tradition official. Every May 16th, I hike up to Pine Mountain with 17 small toys. Simple things like wooden tops, rag dolls, marbles. I place them around the schoolhouse foundation and say a few words about remembering the children who once played there. It's become part of my annual routine, like checking trail markers or updating emergency equipment. Some might call it silly, but I think it's important. Those children waited 54 years to finish their final day of school. The least I can do is remember them. Emma Rodriguez is 12 now, a happy, healthy 7th grader who wants to be a teacher when she grows up. She doesn't talk about her experience on Pine Mountain anymore, but every year, on May 16th, she asks her mother to drive her up to the trailhead so she can leave a small bouquet of wildflowers at the memorial. For my friends, she always says. Last month, I got a call from Ranger Davis over in West Virginia. He'd heard about what happened at Pine Mountain and wanted my advice about a situation in his district. Children camping near an old mining site had reported seeing worker children who invited them to help in the mine. Historical records showed that 8 children had died in a cave-in there in 2022. Itzen Jobai Ishar. I drove over to West Virginia the next day. Some children, it seems, need help finishing their interrupted lessons, no matter where they died. And sometimes, adults like me need to learn that love really can transcend death, even when that love needs to finally let go. The mountains are full of old stories, old tragedies, old loves that refuse to die. I've learned to listen to those stories with respect instead of skepticism, because sometimes the only way to help the living is to first help the dead find peace. If your children ever report seeing other children at historical sites, especially places where tragedies occurred, listen to them carefully. Sometimes the past needs help moving forward. And sometimes, the love of a teacher or parent can hold on so tightly to protect children that it forgets the most important lesson of all. Love means knowing when to let go.